Hello, assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings, good people. I'm Dr. Aisha El-Amin, and I'm part of Masjid Al-Taqwa family. I'd like to first of all, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to ask a few little housekeeping things. If you can please mute yourself, unless you are talking. If you have anything to add to the conversation, whether it be comments or questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. This is a Taleem by our resident Imam today. It is very discussion based. This Taleem, as well as other Taleems and Jumas from Masjid Al-Taqwa, can be found on our YouTube channel, Masjid Al-Taqwa, for you to peruse at your convenience. Please do subscribe and share links with friends as well, because as we know, all knowledge comes from Allah, and it's a blessing to have it. So I will turn over the microphone to Imam Tariq to get us started.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Dr. Aisha. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Let's begin by opening up with our Fatiha, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. All right, alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum again, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to gather with you. I mentioned in the last Jummah khutbah that I gave that I intended to talk more in depth and at length about labor and striving. There are a lot of synonyms that we can use to express the idea of work, right? The striving is the work. And of course, it's appropriate, as Muslims, we always begin with the, excuse me 1 second. That we begin with our Fatiha, this community prayer. It positions our relationship with Allah, not just from an individual standpoint, but from a collective, from a communal standpoint. And that working, that striving is also indicated in the Al-Fatiha, guide us, lead us, and then also looking back to past examples of success. A wonderful saying that I love, as a matter of fact, I think it was Dr. Lionel that I heard who mentioned it the first time I think I heard it, which was success leaves clues. Right. And we simply can look to the past for the clues of those communities that have been successful in their efforts, in their striving. So I want to begin by first saying that I know sometimes we can feel, we don't necessarily feel comfortable in sharing or expressing an opinion. I want to just kind of lay the groundwork here and say that as we look at this topic, as we examine the idea of our collective striving, what that means and how it looks, it's going to be really important for us to understand that we do not have any success in that endeavor if we don't all participate. So there has to be input. Everyone has something to offer with regard to this. And the first thing that I want to begin is kind of giving us a macro view. Looking at the kind of the global, giving us a global perspective. Right now, this is according to the Pew Research Center, that by the year 2050, that Muslims there will be pretty much parity in terms of the number of Muslims and the number of Christians globally. So that's not very far away. Less than 30 years from now, we're looking at that type of a change in in the numbers of adherents of Al-Islam. But while that might seem like a reason for some to cheer, it does not necessarily mean that there's actually a shift in anything that we see with regard to governments, world peace, climate change, anything like that. It is not an indicator that anything actually changes, because presence does not always equate with participation. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that we understand here in the United States of America is that Islam is the fastest, also it is the fastest growing religion in our nation. And while we are undercounted, we're underreported, the estimate right now gives us about 1%, a little, well, some say 2% of the population. But once again, presence does not always equate to participation, right? So the macro is, we're looking at 50% representation as far as in relation to Christianity. And the micro, if we come right here within the Chicagoland area, we're looking at about 400,000 Muslims. And I guess what we want to tie that number to, or that presence to, is to look at how is that impacting, does that equate to participation? And how does that actually impact our lives and the lives of, really the lives of everyone, right? Not just Muslims, but the lives of everyone here in Chicago, in our nation, and the world. So one of the things that I want to look at is Surah Al-Najm. There's an ayat that first should kind of contextualize our understanding of what is actually our due, or what comes to us, or how we actually get anything, and that is through work, right? So, as a matter of fact, it's about 7 ayah here, and it's asking a question. It says, "Those they're not acquainted with the law of Moses," right? It says that that man can have nothing but what he strives for. That's the 39th ayat. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa alaysa lil insani illa ma sa'a. And that is translated as that man can have nothing but what he strives for. And I think sa'a is also, I think it has a relation to time as well. We could look that up. If somebody has their dictionary, wants to look it up, feel free to do so, and feel free to chime in. But the following ayah says that the fruit of his striving will soon come in sight. Now, when we consider what it means to strive and what it means to work individually, I think we have an easier time contextualizing and visualizing what it means for us to have a goal and to achieve that goal as an individual. You want to be a doctor, you go to school, you get your undergrad out the way, you apply for medical school, you go to medical school, you do your residency and all of that, and you become a doctor. You want to be a chef, you go to school for that, whatever it is you want to do, you set your sights on a particular goal and you follow a particular set of steps, and that striving, it leads you to the fruit of that labor. All right, you have something to show for. You've achieved whatever that goal is. Now, from a communal standpoint, it's important for us to always be, as we are as individuals, right? If we set a goal for ourselves, if we take the time to look at, our trajectory. As a matter of fact, I'm glad I can make this reference for those who are able to hear Imam Zaki, his khutbah that he gave when he talked about just kind of this organic way of establishing direction and location, looking behind you and setting a reference point, seeing where you are at that particular moment, looking ahead of you and establishing a point, and then going even further out beyond that point and establishing another reference point, and moving forward and looking back and making sure, this process, you're able to make sure that you're moving in a straight line. All right. So we likewise, once again, kind of going back to that success leaves clues, that we have the ability as individuals to set a goal, to look at where we've been, to look at what's ahead of us and then what's further out even beyond that, and determine if we're moving in that straight line. However, as a community, this process is sometimes left undone, not because we're not aware of the process, but because we have different ways of seeing community, different ways of defining community, and community means different things to us. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind, and because we're in a market-based economy, a society that is very much determined by markets, by consumers, right? People aren't referred to as citizens. Often, if you listen to news reports, you hear people referred to as consumers, right? Consumer confidence, and consumers aren't, they're not purchasing right now, right? We hear things, the environment spoke of in terms of unemployment. We hear things, we hear about the profit, profit margins. We hear about the real estate market. We don't hear commentary about the condition of people's souls, right? We don't hear commentary about the condition where there's mental health awareness, right? But we're not really looking at the spiritual component of what actually animates us and moves us in whatever our endeavors are. That's not something that's addressed. What's addressed is the economy, is the market itself. And when you're in that type of a situation, it could be easy to take on some of the values that moves this society forward, and not just here in the U.S. Right? We have a global market, a global economy, in which, positioned as a consumer, you see things in relationship to what you think is best for you, right? Kind of the a la carte mentality, right? I select, I go to this, I live in this neighborhood because I like these particular amenities. I like, these particular things. I go to school, I choose my education as a consumer, right? Because it leads to this particular outcome. And there's also been the commodification of faith. The religious experience is one where, especially with the with the advent of the internet, with social media, with being able to stream, is that you're not bound to a geographical definition of community, where folks at one point went to whatever house of worship, whatever masjid, whatever church, synagogue, what have you, was in their physical location, their physical area. Now we're not bound by those restrictions, by those considerations. Now people can, I like the way this particular preacher talks. I like the way this Imam talks. I like these particular programs I have at this space. I like the building, the physical structure itself over here. So I'm willing to physically travel, because I am selecting an experience, right? So community, it moves beyond it moves beyond a definition that was just centered around, or at least that had more to do about where you were, right? So you built community where you physically were. Now, there are pros and cons to that, but the idea that there is a consumer element to faith, where it goes back to just the preferences of the individual, and it's not necessarily rooted in an obligation to build collectively, right? It puts the community experience in a different light. And I want to share a few definitions of community, because it's important for us to, as we self-assess, as we look at not just as ourselves as individuals, but the community consciousness, to determine how are we engaging, what is our experience, how do we position community in our life? Is it a place of retreat from the world, or is it a place that the world would come if they knew about it? right? You know, I think that's important. This idea of where religion, faith is sometimes looked at or used as an escape, right? We don't, where people are not coming to their houses of worship, and as Muslims, you know, Muslims as well, they come to the masjid as a way to escape from the world, as a way to escape from the dunya. Instead of, this is the place that I go to, I mean, I can be spiritually recharged, but it's also about a common understanding and a common commitment that we have to do something that is that is beyond. I'm not here just to be entertained, right? Or I'm not here to be entertained, but I'm here to actually, I'm here to contribute. I'm here to grow. So first definition I want to share is it's a group of people living. This is community. A group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common, like the scientific community, right? The business community, right? Thinking about characteristics, or any neighborhood, any physical neighborhood, South Shore, Inglewood, you know, Markham, you know, you think about communities in that regard. Now, so that's much more physical. And I may come back to go into some of these other like subsets of definitions, but I don't want to get lost in this. But one goes from being very physically centered, and then the second explanation, it says community is a feeling of fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals, right? The sense of community that organized religion can provide. That's right, verbatim what the example for that understanding of community is, right? The feeling of fellowship, right? So one is very, it's physical, it's a physical connection, and it's also a manifestation, right, of alignment, right? The scientific community, the business community, people engaged in a particular endeavor. They have a worldview, they have a methodology, they have rules, they have, they're bound in a way. It can be physical, but it's also about a particular outcome. And the second, which can be much more dangerous, and I would say that the religious experience and I don't want to like pigeonhole or be too broad, but just one aspect of it for African American experience has been that religion has been turned into the product of religion, or those adherents of religion, right, who gather together in community, has been distilled, kind of stripped down to a point where it's just about the feeling, right? It's the feeling of fellowship, not the product of the work that comes from the fellowship, right? It's not about alignment and accountability. It's not about achieving any particular goal that is really rooted in the tradition of scripture, which we're going to actually go into in a moment. But it's just about the feeling. And we know how dangerous that can be, because it can be a feel-good experience. It's like going to the movies. You go to a movie that kind of it's uplifting. It's got the great cinematography. It's got the wonderful soundtrack, the music, and everybody gives a great performance, and it's a happy ending, and the credits roll, and everybody, walks out. They're feeling, might even be crying, or, everybody's uplifted, right? Everybody's feeling really great. Nothing has changed, but they've all had this great feel-good experience. And that's not to say that people can't be inspired by feel-good experiences, but the way that we are defined as a community, and the way that we choose community and choose to participate in community, if it is centered around just the idea of feeling good, then that is not a determinant factor in us actually doing good, right? And actually producing anything. Now, in Surah, I should mention this. The third there's a third definition of community, and it's related to ecology. It says a group of interdependent organisms of different species growing or living together in a specified habitat. I'm going to read that again. A group of interdependent organisms of different species growing or living together in a specified habitat. And this one actually should resonate with us, as you know, very deeply, because unlike the promotion of the idea of a separation of church and state on a nation level, we understand on a personal and a communal level that there is no separation for us as Muslims, right? Our deen is it is holistic, it is all encompassing, and we're not just Muslims when we enter into the Musalla, right? When we're in the masjid, we're not just Muslims when we are offering salat, right? Or when we're paying as a cattle on Hajj. We are Muslim all the time, right? Our faith, our awareness, and our relationship with Allah, our taqwa, it is something that animates us and moves us. And we do that not just around other Muslims, but we do it as a part of, in recognition that we're part of a larger body, right? As a part of humanity. So this ecology, this interdependent group of systems, right? That works, that could also be and should also be understood to be related back to those 4 verbs that Imam Muhammad talked about, right? Culture and culture and business and education and what was the other? Culture, business, education. I say government. Yeah, government, right? So these are interdependent. They all influence the other. And then as Bani Adam, right, we understand that the soil or the clay that Adam Islam was brought out of, right, that this is a mixture. This is a mixture, kind of speaks to, once again, it speaks to the people, you know, to be brought out of a particular, to be brought out of diversity, to be brought out of a this to kind of a varying mixture, you know, if you will, and then to be entrusted with authority, you know, after not just being taught, but then being animated by Allah's spirit, right? That relationship that continues to move us forward. So there are some connections that we can make with that particular definition of community as it relates to ecology. Now, one of the notes that I wanted to kind of bring out before going into this next piece is that when we think about scripture, in the Quran and all the scriptures that came before it, and even the introduction of Adam alayhi salam, that these are responses to present conditions. These are responses to present conditions. And by that, I mean that what the Quran and what the Injil and the Torah, what they address in all other scriptures that, you know, we are likely unaware of, but, you know, as Allah sent guidance to people throughout time that we are aware of, and most that we're not aware of. We only know of, of 25 named messengers in the Quran. But what we do understand is that the guidance that came, it was in response to the social norms, the social conditions of that particular time, of those particular times. So, what this tells us is that we're responding to, right? We should see ourselves in response to the conditions that we find ourselves in right now, right? So the religion, the revelation is not something that was given in a vacuum. It was not given before the problems. The problems were existent, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us revelation that allowed us to respond and to correct. So justice, so justice, human dignity, and freedom, these are some of the things that we associate with what Al-Islam in practice protects, right? In practice, not in theory, but in practice, these are the things that are protected by the practice of Al-Islam. So Surah 3, Al-Imran, this is the 138th and 139th ayah. Just going to give you the, I'll just read the English. It says, "Here is a plain statement to men, a guidance and instruction to those who fear Allah. So lose not heart, nor fall into despair, for ye must gain mastery, if ye are true in faith." We'll read that last ayah. "So lose not heart, nor fall into despair, for ye must gain mastery, if ye are true in faith." This should move us to, and I want to mention that this is still connected to the macro and the micro. The macro vision that's pointed to us, 2050, the expected, the continued growth of Al-Islam around the world, putting it back on parity, where we have, an equal number of Muslims as we do Christians in the world. Of course, we know there are other faith traditions as well, but with regard to the history that we're aware of, the violence, the history of contention and the battles, and they go back centuries, and also the history of enlightenment and the upliftment of humanity that has come from Al-Islam, right? That has benefited the entire world, and most certainly, of course, the European nations. It's something that we keep in mind when we think about how these numbers change and how numbers equate to control, and how numbers equate to governance, right? That ayah says, "Lose not heart nor fall into despair, for you must gain mastery if you're true in faith." That should prompt us to ask the question. Well, a number of questions, and the first would be, well, maybe it is, what have I mastered? Now, I could also say, what do I want to master, or what do I need to master? That mastery, of course, it is centrally, it's going to be about our response to the word of Allah, right? Our response to the obligation to pick up the mantle of authority and responsibility that Allah has given us through our father Adam alayhi salam, right? The Khalifa is the successive authority, right? One that continues, on and on, generation to generation. So what have I mastered? And of course, as we make statements, we have to ask ourselves, what is that authority, right? How does that look? What does it actually mean to be an authority? One wonderful, I think a really profound statement about authority is that authority is not a possession. Authority, it is a weight. It is actually a burden, right? And Allah speaks about it as such. It says when Allah offered the trust, when Allah offered the trust to the mountains, right, into the heavens, they turned it down, right? They turned it down. Said, no, we don't want that authority. But man in his haste said, man is ever hasty. He's like, yeah, give it to me. I'll take it. Right, give it to me. I will take it. But the authority, it's not a possession. And unfortunately, this also goes back to how we see community, right? Authority, once again, it's a burden. It's something to carry, right? And we all carry varying types of authority, varying different situations. But for anyone who carries authority and has to discharge authority, you understand the weight, understand the weight of that authority, right? I mean, as a kid, you hear, your mom say, "Because I said so," or father say, I'm the daddy, or we joke about things like that. But then when you become the father or the mother, and you say, "Yeah, I'm daddy," it's all on me. You know, the responsibility is on me. I have to provide. I have to lead by example. I have to respond to the needs of those in my care. Right? Authority, it takes on a, you know, it's not just I get the big piece of chicken. I can go out. I don't have to ask nobody when I leave. No, your authority that you carry is, I mean, that authority you have is an authority that you carry, and you engage with it. You see it in a much different light. You know, it's not just I get to do what I want to do. It's about accountability and it's responsibility. So anyway, so what have I mastered? Right. So after, and because it's important once again to go back that this is a whole, an encompassing way of life. It is not. It's not just about the ritual, right? This is our whole life. So yes, we can say, have I mastered? Am I able to perform my prayers properly? Am I able to read? Am I able to, you know, am I giving my zakat? Am I doing the things that I'm supposed to do? Am I observing the 5 pillars? Am I doing that? Right? That's great. You know, if I can do those things. But we have a whole life that exists outside of the ritual, that the rituals and the spirit that animates us to observe those rituals should actually influence and should move us, right? They should move us. So have I gained mastery in my profession? Have I gained mastery in my efforts to serve? Have I gained mastery in my relationships, right? The way I conduct myself and the way I communicate. Have I gained mastery in my community relationships, right? And this is a whole list of things that we could ask ourselves around this question of what have I mastered? And then that should lead us to ask the question, what have we mastered? What do we need to master? What is worthy of us using our time and our energy and our resources to move into, right? To gain mastery. Now, what we didn't read about those ayats was that, you know, it's followed by saying, if a wound had touched you, a similar wound had touched those, you know, who came before you, right? And those on the other side, right? That difficulty and setback and injuries and all these things are going to happen. But those who gain that sense of mastery over themselves internally, but then are also able to exert that sense of mastery in their lives as well, right? The external manifestation of that mastery, these are those who are going to be successful. And we also, once again, we take this back to the previous ayat that man gets nothing but what he works for or what she works for, right? And so as it is true for the individual, it is also true for the community. So when we think about mastery, if you think about social services here, not just in Chicago, but I would say it's probably true for around the nation, who is a fixture in social services when it comes to giving out food, when it comes to providing shelter, emergency shelter, mental health services, just down the line. Think about whatever comes to mind when you think about, or when we think about and talk about social services. We'll find that it has been dominated for a long time by the Catholic Church. We think about Catholic charities, and this is not something that just began here in the United States, right? Even going back to medieval times, the Catholic Church, and that's that's its own series of discussions, right, as to how they went about trying to administer and to the orphans and the poor and the sick and infirm, folks in that category. But the fact is, it's just moving towards today, and within the history of this nation, they have become, they are a fixture when it comes to social services, right? This is something they have not just mastered the process of administering those services. They are also, because this is a holistic model we're looking at, right? Not just the server and the culture of awareness. They're also connected into the gears of government, right? It's not just a one-off by themselves. They're connected into the gears of government, so that their relationships that have been established, and these relationships are generational, right? They are successive. They've continued to move on and on and on, right? And thus, you know, that sense of mastery, or that sense of that presence that has been built, because it has been something that they've identified and said that this is what we are going to focus on, and this is going to be a lane that we're going to fill. Now, this also brings us back to when we said, how do we see community position? You know, how do we see it? How do we engage with it? Do we see community from a standpoint of, do we engage with it because it's something that makes us feel good? Is it our escape, or is it that place that we actually come together to do the collective work that Allah has put us here and positioned us here to do, right? To respond to the difficulties that we have. I want to share one other thing, and I want to open up. I'm not going to just keep moving along. Let me see it. Okay, this last one thing, and then I'm opening up for any comments. We've been here as Muslims. We've been here in Chicago since, I believe, like 1934. I believe it was a temple number 2 was opened up, and you know, our history as we moved on. And when we think about also community, and because this is greater than presence, and I think that's really what I'm trying to get to, and I would like to hear some thoughts and some ideas around this. Like, presence does not mean participation, right? Being here, it is something to celebrate, but the participation is something that actually leads us to be able to fulfill this particular ayat. This is Surah At-Tawbah, the 33rd ayat. Says, Bismillah, it is he who has sent his messenger with guidance in the religion of truth to manifest it over all religion, although they who associate others with Allah dislike it. So the idea of being placed over all religion, being placed over all concerns, over all loyalties, agendas and intentions, that's a social concern, a social kind of a mandate, to say that the Muslim has a responsibility for directing not just the affairs, right? We're supposed to be involved in those things, but the Muslim has a responsibility for directing the social consciousness, for impacting the consciousness of humanity, wherever we find ourselves, and whatever the determinants and the outlines of the communities that we find ourselves in. And if that's done, then that means that everything that comes from that is going to be a reflection of upholding those concerns that all Scripture has come to address, and that is that freedom, freedom from oppression, right, and tyranny, dignity, so on and so forth. So I want to open up and ask if there are any comments. I've got more stuff, but like I said, as a community, it's important that when we talk about community, we should certainly be doing so from a position of inclusion. So first thing I would ask, and if this is not the question that you'd like to address, if you have something else that's on your mind you've been holding, feel free to throw it out. But what are the things that as a community, that you may feel that we need to engage in and we need to master?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm gonna just kind of get the conversation started. Just because this idea that you threw out of retreat versus escape, I kind of wanted to dive into that a little bit. Um, and I'm wondering what both folks feel like our space is, and if it's one or the other, what are the things that we should be doing, like, kind of collectively, to make sure that is not that. Uh, yeah.
I will risk messing up and jumping out here on that one. This is kind of relevant to what I was going to mention anyway. I think what you're asking, the information that's implied by your question, is really, really critical information for us to have as a community, but even for those in the leadership to have even more so, because when the leadership knows what the congregation or the community, how the community is perceiving the institution, then the leadership can make the moves that are needed to clarify or bring the community to that perspective that really is aligned with what our mission should be. So I think getting information and having reliable information on what people are thinking is a really important step. You know, I might have a bias because I've done that in a number of ways before, but I found it to be very valuable. And there's nothing more powerful than moving out on truth. You know, I mean, obviously we have our scripture, but also truth about our reality. We base our moves on what we think the truth is, and really it's not that, then we'll only be so successful. So I think we should, even though we obviously have a larger community than the number of people on this call, but it's a large enough community that we should not ever be assuming that we really know how many people are thinking a certain way and what those thought patterns are, because it's not reliable. We really want that information, not because we're interested in knowing people's business, because we aren't. We're interested in knowing whether we're all on the same page, how we can get on the same page, and maybe we'll find out some concerns that that would shape our priorities, you know, as a masjid community too, that we weren't aware
of. I absolutely appreciate that, Clyde. I think it's there's a double edge for me in that, right? So I think we can gather information, but that information has to come with that responsibility, right? You know, so I mean, if we come up with 30 things that we want to do, and there's one person that's volunteering to do it, right? And so I think with every right, there's a responsibility. And this is kind of how we talk to students at the university, right? There's, yes, you have a right to this, a right to that, right to this, right? But you also have a responsibility to, and a responsibility to. And I think oftentimes we divorce those conversations, and that's not good for us as individuals, and it's certainly not good for us as a community. And so I just hope that as we discuss things, that it is not, this is what we should do, but this is the talents that I'm gonna bring to make sure that we do it, right? As a part of that conversation as well.
I completely agree. Motivating people is always like herding cats. So, but people the more you learn about cats, the better you are at herding them. You know, I think it's easy to assume that because we all known each other so long, you know, or our families have known each other so long, it's really easy to assume that we know sometimes more than we really do know about people, because we've been around them so long, you know, about their abilities, about the other things that they're doing with their lives, etc. For example, there were some shortcomings of this recent Muslim survey, because one of the major shortcomings was the percentage in which we were represented. But I like the concept, because the concept did bring out some revelations, and I hope people will use that information in designing their communication with the community and moving the community forward. I think we can also, but it also was a sign to me that it's a hint that maybe we could be using some tools like that a little bit more. You're going to always have a core group of people who are doing the work. You're going to have a core group of people who are the leaders, and you're going to have a core group of people who be tired as hell because it doesn't seem anybody else is doing, at times. But it's still, I just have that faith in learning about people and using that knowledge to get people to do things that maybe we hadn't gotten them to do before, or finding out things that they're interested in, and maybe we can give them responsibility for moving along.
Well, yeah, one of the things that I see is if someone asks us about who we are, somebody asks me who I am, I could give them three or four things that I do to say that kind of represent, what I spend my time doing. When we think about ourselves as a community, if someone asks the same thing, then, likewise, we should be able to point to these are the things that we do. And more importantly, we should be able to say, these are why we do those things. And this is the vision that we have, or that we are working towards to, perfect the performance of those things. And I mentioned that we've been here since 34, and that's really to talk about the fact, for us to gauge and think about what has been or really currently, what is what's our impact? How are we positioned in all of those areas, in culture and in education and economy, right? And in governance, how are we positioned in those things? And I think that's a fair question for us to ask when we think about just look across the aisle and look at the Christian denominations of Protestants and Episcopalians and all these other folks, and the conventions, how they come together, and how as a community, they are geographically, split up. But as a community, their shared concerns are turned into political and economic leverage, right? And action. That is something that while we have the freedom to choose and for ourselves, we don't have we don't have a hierarchy, so to speak. It becomes that much more important for us to make sure that we have connections that are also accompanied by accountability that allow us to move forward. Because without the connections, without accountability, then, I think we are less there. But I think, once again, kind of going back to understanding who we are, who do we want to be as a community, and what are we doing and why are we doing those things? That's something that every community member should be able to answer and also explain, at least know for themselves how they fit into that.
Assalamu alaikum. Okay, I think that question, or just that idea of community and exploring like what exactly that means, because I think just the different definitions, people say, oh yeah, I'm a member of this community, I'm a member of that community. I think it really is important to consider what does that mean when you say you're a member of a community. Is it in practice, or just, just this feeling, like you were talking about, how are we showing up? Are we there doing the work of actual community members, just distinguishing between, the idea or the theory of something and what it looks like in practice. Just and then too, just what stood out to me is you said the number of Muslims were on the rise, and we're going to be, what did you say, that we're on track to be
by 2050, there'll be as many Muslims as there are Christians in the world.
In the world. Okay. In the world. Okay. It's because you can't help but thinking that Muslims, period, practicing Muslims, adherent Muslims, we're an asset to the wider community. But then you think about like what you said about consumerism, how many of our beliefs, obviously we be at odds with people who want to make money off of certain things that, we just don't do, but we add value to spaces we're in. With the idea of mastery and just the excellence and continuing of education and giving back and helping and just all the things that we add, I think, to just community life, the wider community life. And if we're not within our own community, if we don't, I don't know, if we're not doing the work within our own community, I don't know. I just more questions come up for me. I mean, obviously we can't continue to move forward or to grow, within our own communities if we're not showing up in that way. If I don't know if we're spread out, I don't know what it is, but just not willing to show up, or maybe haven't defined our roles, maybe like what is it that we need to do to be a fully functioning member of whatever community that we're a part of. Anyway, interesting conversation, interesting ideas. Thank you.
No, I think that's Hakeem, you asked a really good question, and I think if we're going to be intentional about our community and we want that to grow and be protected and have fidelity, then we have to understand what that means, right? What our membership in it means, how we define it. I think that's a really kind of hearty conversation that, and I know you as educator, we have social agreements with our class and our students, and and so like, what is a social agreement between individuals that make up the community? Because that's what the community is going to be. It's going to be an amalgamation of those social agreements.
I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention before we hung up, we talked a lot about numbers today, and it was somewhat enlightening for me. I had told myself that Muslims were closer to being even with the Christians than they are, but that's okay, because earlier you talked about how Catholics are the ones we think about when we think about people on the front lines of dealing with social problems. Catholics are the minority sect or denomination, whatever term it's best when you talk about all Catholics and you talk about all Christians. Catholics are actually like 23% and Protestants 43% or something like that. And then there are others whose influence certainly outpaces their numbers ridiculously. The Jewish community, for example, I mean, their numbers are much smaller than even the Catholics, but look at the influence that they have. And they have some influence for good. And, we know there's some other stories to be told. But most importantly is, our numbers definitely don't determine the level of influence we have, especially in terms of doing good in the world. Because the more good we do in the world, the more at peace we are ourselves in that world. Because the world looks like what we know is a world that we can live in and live our deen and be at peace. So that's our reward, is for actually changing the world. Our reward is not just in how many more people become Muslims. And of course, our reward is from Allah for the work for what we do.
Yeah. I think this is I appreciate that, and I agree with all of that. I think this is actually a really exciting time for us. And a part of that excitement is determining, what is going to be the what's the direction? What are we going to choose in this particular moment? What are the things that we're going to choose to to really dive into, to master, right? I think that the feelings of fellowship and camaraderie, brotherhood and sisterhood, those are there without a doubt. And a lot of that has come and it's been strengthened through our struggle, through our work together. But translating that into greater presence in the minds of the community, not just as Muslims, but the larger community, the larger population, that requires that work, right? And Allah says, you get nothing but what you work for, right? So, we're left with, we have a certain amount of resources, a certain amount of time. How are we going to spend that time? And what are we going to spend those resources working towards? So,
can I jump in again?
Yeah.
So my mind keeps going to, so the number of Muslims are growing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what does that look like? Yeah, the numbers are growing. We should see some, there should be some clear like markers. Okay, I know there are more Muslims because this is happening in the world, or more of that is happening. And I guess that's what you're talking about. If we pick an area, what's our area of expertise, or what area are we going to focus on? Like when you think of the Catholics, you think, oh, charity, giving, the Catholic charities, that's what pops into your mind. And I know the media has kind of branded Muslims in a certain way, but how are we going to rebrand ourselves? What are people thinking of when they think of Muslims? When they think Muslims, they're going to think of what specifically, not what area of expertise, but what is it? How can we corner the market, but to use those terms, like all these consumerism terms, like what area are we going to, like, what is our focus going to be when people think of Muslims? The numbers are growing. They're like, oh yeah, these are the people who, I don't know, do whatever. I can't think of anything right now, but do whatever positive thing in the world. I just keep thinking about that. If the numbers are growing, there should be some indication, some change in society, some positive change in society, so to speak.
If
you see, does that make sense when I'm saying?
No, that makes perfect sense. And that's the counterpoint, I think, to the idea that presence does not equate to participation, right? Numbers can be there, but if the participation is not there, if the work is not there, then it really does not result in, it doesn't result in a change. Now, I mentioned our history here because that history is one that has been very much about creating community on all fronts, right? Education, economy, government, every front, right? So having an internally supported economy that was also directed outward, your supermarkets and all the other businesses, and those were models. That was part of the success, the clues that success left, and that can't be negated. And we're at 2:00 right now. Dr. Aisha?
Yes, that was kind of why I raised my hand. To say, first of all, this is a very important and healthy conversation, and it's part one, right? There's a part two next week. And so what I ask of the believers is to think about some of the questions that have been raised here, so that we can go from heightened understanding to some collective understandings around these questions. Come with more questions. Bring someone, send a link to someone else to have this discussion so that it's a wider discussion. And may Allah bless us for the work that we do on his behalf. Thank you, Imam, for Taleem. And if you can close us out in dua, please.
Okay. All right. Okay. I thought I saw a hand up. All right. Alhamdulillah. Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Amen.